What is the history of this beginning 12,000 years ago and how we got there today? Well, essentially all cheeses are began in areas that were very warm. The natural lactic bacteria would naturally curdle any milk that was set aside from milking the livestock that they were beginning to learn how to do way back at the beginning of agriculture. And because livestock were not common and therefore dairy was not common, cheese and yogurt began as only food for gods and kings, and sometimes kings were gods or considered gods in those places. Brine cheeses then began to be developed, as well as the technology of using rennet to coagulate cheese before you've acidified the cheese. Whereas when you make yogurt cheese, you have to acidify it to coagulate it. When you use rennet, you can coagulate before acidification, and it gives you so many other options for dealing with that curd. Those brine cheeses sprang up in the Mediterranean as a form of trade, because once they were in the brine, they would age and continue to be better, and therefore could tolerate the long ship rides to the next trade station, and became a very valuable piece of trade, along with wine and olive oil, etc. So with the development of rennet, we're able to create a number of varieties of cheeses, because we can coagulate that milk before we begin to acidify it, which gives us all kinds of options. At the same time, the shepherds are learning that they can use this technique called transhumance, which is when they bring their flock and their animals to the mountains in the spring. They graze up the mountain as the grasses develop higher and higher on the mountain, as it warms up in stages higher and higher up on the mountain through the spring and the summer. And then in the fall, they begin grazing their way down and getting the second growth on all those pastures they grazed on the way up. Meanwhile, the villagers down in the valleys would be cutting hay and also growing crops for storage that then maintains both the people and the animals through the winters, and then repeat. And this is a really efficient and sustainable way of creating food from the mountain grasses. They're actually making cheese up on the mountains, bringing those cheeses down for the humans to eat during the winters. So this is a really interesting point where we've got renneted cheeses, different points of acidification, and then this rotation of transhumance. They make those cheeses up on the mountains as they're milking, bring them down, and store them in caves in the villages. Well, in those caves are root cellars. It's a more temperate climate. It also allows for the development of these mold rinds that then begin to give more character to each of these cheeses, depending on what the villagers or that local area prefers. We now are in the era of aging our cheeses, as well as being able to store them, and through aging create all these different varieties as well with different characteristics. British agriculture developed around the ability to transfer valuable products from the farms to the larger cities where they could get their best prices, and this also happened with cheese. Cheeses were made in Britain, or the best cheeses or the most well-known cheeses were made in Britain that in a way that they could survive a wagon trip to London. And this is like cheddar and Gloucestershire and Leicestershire cheeses, definitely hard, definitely longer aging. As a result, this idea of the cheddar method was studied when people began to discover what are bacteria and also the effects of being able to control temperature, etc. The US then took this cheddar method and centralized the production of cheese in cheese factories. This way they could make these durable, long-lasting cheeses that could be shipped around the world and become part of an agricultural trade world, when there's now regular ships and trains and all sorts of transport getting cheeses not just to the local town, but all around the world. In the process, they actually freed the farmers' wives from the daily dairy duties in the process, because instead of having each wife at each farm make the cheese each day, they centralized the process in a factory that was co-owned by many different farms around that region, and thus they still had their cheese and their butter, but the wives were not responsible for making it. This became the sort of standard cheese-making method in the factory, which actually the idea spread around the world, of course, because it's so efficient, until the 1970s, when young people in the US moved back to rural areas and rediscovered the magic of cheese-making and milking livestock, and have since developed this idea of artisanal cheese, which has been delighting cheese lovers who used to only eat imported cheese.